Chapter 21 by Nicholas Agar is that there is a legitimate place for human genetic enhancement. Now, in this interesting article, he says the first step in the defense is to reject the idea that an enhancement's being genetic matters morally. Now, the next big thing he's going to do is to say that what marks off radical enhancements from moderate enhancements is that the former, namely radical enhancements, improve significant attributes and abilities to levels that greatly exceed what is currently possible for human beings. So he's going to argue that the difference between genetic enhancement and environmental enhancement, not important. What matters is the difference between radical and moderate enhancement. So in defining genetic enhancement, he says the category of enhancement encompasses interventions whose purpose is to boost levels of functioning beyond biological norms. Now, human biological norms, he notes, are, depending on your views about how we were created, fixed either by evolutionary history or by God's plans. Importantly, genetic enhancements are enhancements achieved by the selection or the modification of genetic material. Okay, so on any view of the fixing of human biological norms, the idea is that genetic enhancements are ways of going past those biological norms using selection of genetic material or modification of genetic material. Now, Agar holds to an interactionist view of human development. The way he explains this, we result from the complex interaction of tens of thousands of genes and uncountable environmental influences. So interactionism is against both genetic determinism and environmental determinism. Okay, it's wanting to say it's both and. Although he doesn't really commit himself to determinism in those words, the idea is that genetic factors play a role and environmental factors play a role. It's not either or that determines how we behave and what we're like as individuals. So he recognizes an objection. He says, this assertion that I've made of the parity of genetic and environmental influences may seem to be at odds with the oft-presented message that certain human traits are largely genetic, while others are largely environmental. And his example is eye color. A lot of people will say, look, some traits like eye color are totally genetic and not at all environmental. Now, his response to this includes the following idea. He says, look, I have brown eyes. Suppose the tape of my life were to be rewound to conception and then restarted. It is likely, he says, that certain changes to my environment, the introduction of certain viruses or specific dietary modifications, would change my eye color. Now, let's take a look at his view of potential problems with his approach. Okay, so he's going to say in the next few pages, till the end of the article, I'm going to explore 5 ways in which genetic enhancements might turn out to be more morally problematic than environmental enhancements. And then he's going to reply to these ways. So, are genetic enhancements more morally problematic because they're of greater magnitude than the environmental enhancements? He's going to eventually say maybe, but probably not. So he says it's possible that genetic enhancement could produce significant increases in intelligence, but it's also far from true that a few millennia of experiments in educating humans have exhausted the ways in which human intelligence might be boosted. So he's admitting that, yeah, genetic enhancement could increase our intelligence a lot, but so could new developments in tweaking our educational environment. And his example comes from a psychologist named Erickson, who cites the case of a Hungarian child psychologist, Laszlo and Clara Polgar, and their program of extended deliberative practice turned their 3 daughters into some of the world's strongest chess players. Now, this is going to be an example in the rest of the article, but the idea is they gave their homeschooled daughters tens of thousands of hours of learning from failures and not resting content with successes, in particular with teaching them how to play chess. And they became really good chess players. I mean, really good chess players. Now, some of the more radical advocates, Agar notes, of human enhancement actually see the genetic modifications as kind of passé, or kind of like old hat, as he puts it. For example, Kurzweil advocates grafting a variety of cybernetic implants and neuroprostheses to our bodies and brains. So some people say, look, the environmental changes we can make with technology, with electronics, with other kinds of tools are actually far greater in magnitude than the genetic changes. So his summary is that, look, there's no reason to believe that environmental and genetic enhancements have to differ in degree. Okay, one can make just as big changes as the other. Okay, the second case. Are genetic enhancements more morally problematic than environmental enhancements because they pose a greater threat to our humanity? Now, he says here, look, modifying human DNA differs in potentially pushing us beyond the genetic boundaries of the human species, according to many people. But in response to this, he says, the view of species as having definite genetic boundaries is challenged by new work on the relationship between development and evolution. And this is sometimes called the Evo-Devo approach, which in one form says the following. On the Evo-Devo view, it is possible that a human genome could yield something that was manifestly non-human by altering the timing of a few key genes. So this particular approach wants to suggest that there's a lot more genetic similarity between different species than is commonly thought, and so what it is that turns on and off those genes is what distinguishes those species. Not the presence of the genes, but the things that turn on and off the genes. Okay, so he then concludes this section by saying, look at some environmental things. The possibility of cybernetic enhancements provides a lot clearer cases of genetically human non-humans. And so he talks some science fiction about some Terminator characters where it looks like you've got a genetically human non-human that's mostly robotics with just like an outer layer of skin. So he wants to say, look, that's not a genetic alteration. That's like some other kind of environmental shift. Now he's going to say there's no reason to think that genetic modification is intrinsically more likely to turn us into post-humans or into any other kind of non-human than is environmental modification. So you see his strategy here, right? His strategy is not necessarily to say, well, look, these are not risks at all for genetic enhancement. Rather, his strategy is to say, look, these risks with genetic enhancement are no greater than the risks with environmental enhancement. Okay, third objection, is genetic enhancement less fair than environmental enhancement? In this interesting discussion, he says, look, this concern should not be minimized. This is kind of seen in the movie Gattaca too, but he says it attaches both to environmental enhancement and to genetic enhancement. Concerns about fairness apply to techniques of environmental enhancement that exist already. Right? Not everybody can homeschool their kids like those Polgar girls, and not everybody who can even provide any kind of education to their kids, whether it's homeschool, private, or public, are able to do it equally. Right? Vast differences in environments, in the ability to provide environments, raise concerns about fairness. So he says the factors that rightly prompt concerns about fairness are price, and other barriers to access are neither genetic nor environmental. Okay, the fourth objection, are genetic enhancements more morally problematic than environmental enhancements because they tend to conflict with the recipient's autonomy or their ability to regulate their lives? This is an interesting one. He says the best opportunity to genetically enhance an organism arises at the very beginning of its life. This ideal opportunity, however, arises before there has been any opportunity to consult the recipient of the enhancement, right? You can't really change what your mom and dad do to you if they genetically alter you as a one-celled human organism. Now, one philosopher from Germany named Jürgen Habermas has a really influential way of stating this kind of worry. Habermas says he portrays the future generations of a society that practices genetic enhancement. These future generations can be thought of as defenseless objects. Okay? The future generations are defenseless objects of prior choices made by the planners of today. Now, in response to some of this, Agar wants to say, look, the Polgar girls speak of their enjoyment of chess. Even so, it's not as if they had much input into their educational program, right? So take the environmental case. There's a situation in which the environmental cases of enhancement don't really leave a perfect amount of choice for their recipients. Now, even very ambitious programs, he says, of directed practice may seem to give their human objects an option of resistance unavailable to the prenatally genetically enhanced, right? So somebody's going to come back to Agar and say, yeah, but the chess girls could just throw their pieces across the room, right? But I can't do that with my own genes. I can't throw my genes across the room once they've been put in me. Now, Agar's response to this is to say, look, this overlooks an option of resistance that's still available to those who are prenatally enhanced. You can prevent the alterations from having the effects that your enhancer was hoping for, right? This is because of the interactionist view, right? Even if your parents genetically engineered you to be a brilliant mathematician, you can refuse to study math past the first grade. So there. Okay, fifth problem. Are genetic enhancements more morally problematic than environmental enhancements because they are riskier? Interesting kind of question here dealing with risk. Now, he says that genetic enhancement as it presents to us in the early 20th century, right now, in other words, is riskier. Granted. He's willing to admit that. But this may not be true of the near future. So, in conclusion, he says of this first half of the article, my prediction, based on the parallel contributions of genes and environment to the construction of human beings, is that any purported moral differences will disappear when they're subject to closer examination. What I'm asking for is that we be morally consistent. In other words, this consistency between genetic enhancements and environmental enhancements is one of moral evaluation, not a consistency of moral conclusion. Okay?